to today's anti-racist resource guide. We will be talking about the awesome podcast Code Switch. So, as always, let's start off with some format things. What is this resource? It is a podcast. It is broadcast by NPR. The episode length varies. It's on average about 22 minutes to 34 minutes. There are some outliers. The shortest ones I've personally seen are 18. The longest one I've personally seen is 38, but varies. Frequency. It's a weekly podcast. They broadcast on Wednesdays. And the history is that it started in 2013 as a blog, and then it moved into a podcast in 2016. So basically, there was a grant, about 1.5 million, I believe. I forgot to wrote it down. And the first thing that was published for Code Switch was an essay by one of the hosts, and we're going to be talking about the host, Gene Demby, and it was how code switching explains the world. And so that was in April 2013. So, pause. Here's where I think we should talk about what is code switching. Let's ignore the dictionary definition and instead look at the piece Gene wrote in April 2013, introducing the Code Switch team. There's a sentence he writes that says, in one sense, code switching is about dialogue that spans cultures. He goes on to describe it using a verb that really hits the nail on the head: hopscotching. When someone code switches, they hopscotch between cultural identities that still make up their single identity. Want to dive deeper? I highly recommend you do a quick YouTube search on the definition of code switch, because there are quite a few good video explanations out there that are only a couple of minutes. A good example, though, is one Gene later goes on to talk about. In an email to your boss, you're going to use proper grammar, full punctuation, and jargon fitting of that business setting. With your friends, you'll be texting in lowercase with acronyms and gift sets. He goes on to say, talk in one setting in a tone that's best suited for another, and you might play yourself. Comedians Key and Peele talk about code switching a lot in their sketches, and do a brilliant job of using comedy to illustrate these concepts.
But that's the reason. When we're around other brothers and sisters, you will see us.
You gotta dial it up a little bit.
You gotta dial it up. Oh, see, you know what I'm talking about, brother.
Oh, you know I know what you're talking about, right?
You know I know you know.
You know I know what you're talking about, man. Come on, no doubt, man. No doubt.
Fortunately, the orchestra is already filled up, but they do have seats that are still left in the dress circle. So if you want me to get them theater tickets right now, I'm gonna do it right now.
What's up, dog? I'm about 5 minutes away.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, cool. No, they're all good singers.
Again, this is a very surface level definition. The podcast definitely explores it more, but look for examples of code switching all around you and appreciate it for the cultural tool that it is. Want a fun, artistic take on code switching? Check out the movie Sorry to Bother You. It's really a wild ride.
Hey, young blood, let me give you a tip. Use your white voice.
Man, I ain't got no white voice.
Oh, come on, you know what I mean. You have a white voice in there, you can use it. It's like when you're pulled over by the police.
Oh, no, I just use my regular voice when that happens. I just say, back the fuck up off the car and don't nobody get
All
out.
right, man, I'm just trying to give you some game. You want to make some money here? Then read the script with a white voice.
People say I talk with a white voice anyway, so why ain't it helping me out?
Well, you don't talk white enough. I'm not talking about Will Smith's wife. I'm talking about the real deal, like this young blood.
Hey, Mr. Kramer, this is Langston from Regal View. I didn't catch you at the wrong time, did I?
So, now let's talk about the people behind Code Switch. There is a great team behind Code Switch, but today I'm going to talk about mainly the three most visible people, the three co-founders. So that's two hosts and then a correspondent. So, first one is Gene Demby. He attended Hofstra, and before Code Switch, he worked for the New York Times and the Huffington Post. So he is one of the voices that you are going to hear the most on Code Switch. And the second voice that you hear the most is Shireen Marisol Meraji. She is Puerto Rican and Iranian, and she went to San Francisco State University. And before Code Switch, she did things for NPR such as All Things Considered and Marketplace. The next person who's a co-founder is Karen Grigsby Bates. So she's not necessarily a co-host, but she's a senior correspondent. So what Karen does is she does a lot of the interviews. She covered race for NPR and still does in a manner before going on to be one of the founders of Code Switch. She's also an author. She has a book about manners and 2 mystery books. So more things for you to add to your resource list in supporting people of color. And she is an alumnus of Wellesley College. So, what is it? I think the best way to describe Code Switch is to take the quote directly from their website. It says, "Remember when folks used to talk about being post-racial? Well, we're definitely not that. We're a multiracial, multi-generational team of journalists fascinated by the overlapping themes of race, ethnicity, and culture, how they play out in our lives and communities, and how all of this is shifting." Couldn't have said it any better, because with this podcast, their topics cover the widest spectrum of any podcast I've personally experienced. They talk about sex, identity, gender, reparations, census, music, psychology, Hamilton, just everything under the sun. It is absolutely fantastic, and we're going to talk about why this might be a good resource for you. To clarify, though, how I went about researching this particular resource, I had heard of Code Switch before this wave of education, and I heard about it maybe in 2017. It was my second year of teaching, and I listened to episodes sporadically. I was not a weekly listener, just sporadic here and there. And so when I decided that this was the next resource I was going to dive into, what I did was I listened to about 5 of the most recent episodes. So just to give you kind of a look at where I am basing the opinion on whether or not this is a good resource for your learning type off of. So it's those sporadic episodes plus the 5 most recent episodes that I listened to. There are a couple reasons that this is a good source. You might think off the bat, hey, this is a good resource for you if you are an audio learner. And that's true. If you do better listening to things and the visual is not a component, then yes, this is definitely one of the reasons this could be a good resource for you. But there's a few more on top of that. For one, the episode length, I think, is a huge component to this. They are very, very short. So a lot of people get scared of podcasts because a lot of podcasts that I know, their episodes are about an hour in length. These are, as we said, between 22 and like 32 minutes long. So it's really easy to just pop on and get a pretty thorough education on a topic that you never know what's coming. And that, to me, is really good for people who have short attention spans. So audio learners plus short attention spans. But let's say you don't identify as an audio learner, this could still be a good resource for you because it's short. So I'm a visual learner. Podcasts aren't always good for me. I like them. I like podcasts a lot, but I have to be in a really specific mood and a really specific mental space. But with Code Switch, because they're so short and they're so easy to just kind of pop on, I can listen to Code Switch more frequently than I could some of the other podcasts I'm listening to. So there's one component, is the episode length. The other thing that's really cool about Code Switch is that the Code Switch team actually has 2 different mediums. There's the podcast, which is kind of what a lot of people are talking about now as a resource, but they also put out written mediums. They put out articles, think pieces, opinion pieces, weird little history blurbs. It's just all there in written format, and those are also pretty short and convenient. And I think the best way that we can look at this and that I can explain it to you is to look at the website. So a lot of people are going to jump right to listening to the podcast on however you listen to the podcast, whether that's Spotify, Google Play, Apple Music, whatever it is. But I think even if you're going to listen to the podcast, you should go to the website because they format it really, really well. They format it very clearly, and it includes all content. It includes both those written mediums and those audio listens. So let's take a look at the website. Okay, so here we are. First navigating steps is that everything is in a timeline fashion. It's going to be most recent at the top, and then if you scroll back, you're going to go backwards in time. So with those 2 different mediums that we were talking about, the audio medium and the reading medium, It's easy to tell which one is which. So if we're scrolling down and we end up seeing a blue button with the play symbol, listen, and then however long the episode is, that means that's part of the weekly podcast of Code Switch. If it does not have this blue button, it's simply a written piece. There are different types of written pieces that they have. Like if you see above the title here, it says Word Watch, so that's exploring the history of Boogaloo. Really interesting read for my music folks out there. And if you scroll up, here's a good example of, they put opinion next to this one because it is Karen Grigsby Bates' opinion piece. I highly recommend that you read these two. They're very short, great reads, and really educational on the protests that are going on in the country right now. I have yet to read this one. I'm really excited because that has to do with what we're talking about, resources and how we need to actually act on them. So very excited to hop on this read. But the nice thing about these reads, as we were saying about this site in general, is that they're really short and easy to consume. So if we click on Karen Grigsby Bates' opinion piece, here we are at the top, and look how long it takes to scroll to the bottom. Here we go. Bum, bum, bum. Boop. That's it. Not a long read at all, but very thorough. And that's one thing I really want to say about this resource. No matter how long the episodes are, no matter how short the episodes are, they are always incredibly thorough. And they're always incredible to listen to. They have the best voices of any podcaster I've listened to, honestly. They just know how to move about a microphone. And that's everyone on their team, including the interns and the people that I didn't get to mention. They have personality, they make listening exciting, and they're incredibly engaging. So that's another reason why for those people with short attention spans, it might capture you, because they know how to engage in that medium where they're not seen, but their voice is amplified. And there is such a charisma to it that I just find very, very admirable. Because I admit that's another thing that loses me about podcasts sometimes, is it can get a little boring or monotone. And that has never happened to me with an episode of Code Switch. It's always moving. It's very fast paced, but not in a way that you're not absorbing the information that they're talking about. I felt like everything they were talking about, even when they were talking about heavy hitting subjects like reparations, who should get reparations and how, and that was again like a 24-minute long episode, I felt like I got everything they said, but that there wasn't any chance for me to lose interest or get distracted by the chores I was doing while I was doing it. I was doing some work at the kitchen table, and I had the podcast on in the background, and I was able to stay engaged in both tasks and still walk away thoroughly educated. So I think that's another reason that this is a resource that maybe you should go to first, for all sorts of types of learners, but definitely, yes, our short attention span audio learners might benefit from this the most. Before I go, I think there are a few episodes I would like to recommend to everyone off the bat. Obviously, it's cliche of me to say, listen to them all, but you should definitely, listen to a couple, because the team does such a great job of covering all sorts of topics and making a space for BIPOC, and it's great. But some really pertinent on point ones right now is the one that I highlighted when we were looking at the website, which is a decade of watching Black people die, which was really heavy but really poignant. And also one that they wrote back in July 2016 called Black and Blue, and it's talking about the realities of Black people in the police department. And I think that even though it was written a few years ago, it's very poignant and it's on the nose, and it might give you an insight into why the things that are happening are going on. So an incredible team with incredible voices and incredible talent of keeping you engaged on really serious and important matters. Highly recommend Code Switch for everybody and anybody, but really good for audio listeners who have short attention spans. This is Anti-Racism Resource Guide, and remember, Black Lives Matter.